Hello and welcome to Your Property Empire. I'm Chris Gray. On tonight's show, many years ago the rules changed for self-managed super funds, allowing people to borrow money for buying property. Well, how much money do you need in your super to make it worthwhile? What type of assets can you buy? And what can't you do, and how friendly are the banks at lending to self-managed super funds? Well, joining me tonight to comment on our stories is Jeff Brown, mortgage broker and self-managed super specialist from Hunterwood Solutions. And as always, we've got Charles Tarbey, chairman and owner of 2021 Australasia. Welcome, guys. Jeff, first time on the show, so just give us a quick intro on your background.
Yes, Chris, I've been around for quite some time, as you can probably notice. But yeah, I did a lot of time with St George in the product management team, and I was lucky enough to be involved in setting up and putting out the self-managed super fund for St George Bank. Been broking now for about 3 years, and do a bit of everything, and self-managed super funds is part of my things I like to do.
Cool. So probably the obvious question to start off for the viewers is, why would you want to invest in self-managed super versus, I guess, doing it yourself or putting it within a trust? Yeah,
well, in a self-managed super fund, you're allowed to actually make your own decisions on which way you want to go on the decisions you make. So you can actually go out there and buy a property, buy commercial property, buy shares, rather than actually being in a group and say, OK, I want to be in this group, and they just go and do it for you. So it's simpler that way.
Now, Charles, self-managed super funds is a bit topical these days. Someone's mentioned that young first home buyers, they might actually be able to start using that as a way to get in the market. More options, good or a bad thing, do you think?
Yeah, I think Paul Keating summed it up, albeit in a different manner than most, that it's probably a dangerous idea. My biggest concern with it, I mean, I love to see more young people buying property. That's fantastic. But the reality is, if they make mistakes, if things don't quite go right, what happens down the track? Who's going to look after them? Because the super fund was designed for a reason. It was designed specifically to help you grow into retirement, if you like. And so I think most people would be concerned if they made some bad decisions that could impact on them very, very badly down the track.
So, Jeff, I guess who's it eligible for? And I guess bouncing off what Charles has said is, what are the consequences if you don't do it right?
Well, that's right. Basically, most people over 18 can have a super fund. People like, if you've had prior convictions of dishonesty, if you've had a disqualification from APRA or the taxation department, then you can't go into a super fund. So if you've done the wrong thing in a corporate life before, you can't have a self-managed super fund. If you do the wrong thing while you're having a super fund, if you make a wrong decision and do the wrong thing, the taxation department can actually charge you a much higher rate of tax. So you currently charge 15% tax now on your contributions. They can go up to 100%. So it's quite a large...
That's a serious penalty, isn't it?
It's a big penalty, yes. You've got to be really careful, and you've got to minute everything you do. So that's one of the things you must make sure, that you've got someone behind you that knows what they're talking about to help you to keep it all going in the right direction.
Now, Charles, especially if we talk about some of these young first home buyers, they haven't got the money to get the best financial advisors, the best accountants and the rest of it, but doing it yourself, surely that's got to be a pretty scary thing.
It is a scary thing, and I guess I have my own self-managed super fund, but I'm in the industry in terms of real estate, so I can see the movement there. I know what I can and can't buy, and I was very thrilled when commercial property could be converted. I was very thrilled when all of a sudden you could find a way to borrow in your super fund. But there were some downsides to it too, and I think young couples really need to be, or anybody in self-managed super funds need to be aware of. The paperwork is detailed. You've got to make sure you get it audited effectively. That costs a little bit of money at the end of each year as well. And the decisions you make, a lot of people have gone out and bought property for their own personal use in super funds, holiday homes, boats, etc., which you can't do unless there's a rational reason for it being part of your end result retirement. So there are some rules around it. But the one thing I found most difficult with it was that in one of my properties, I couldn't borrow against it. For example, it was there, and the only way I could get the money out was to sell the property, then go and buy something again and borrow against it. That was the one I found most difficult, because it cost me a lot of money to do that. I did do it at the end of the day, but it costs money.
And Jeff, that's probably one of the biggest downsides, isn't it? Because for a lot of investors, you look at growing your portfolio, refinance within a year, use that to then carry on property. That's the big downside you can't do in super.
Cash is king with super. The one good thing about you can do is actually have an offset account with your super home loan. So you can actually punch all your money into your offset account, so it's not actually going into your loan. And when you actually build that money up, you can actually put that towards a deposit for another property. So the offset account, there's only one or two banks that actually do it, but I find it's one of the best things you can ever have.
I'd never ever heard anyone talk about that before. I mean, it's normal in property investing, but not within self-managed super funds.
Yeah. Well, yeah. The offset account was, I was lucky, as I said, I was on the team that put it together, and when we were putting it together, we actually just downgraded a normal account a normal home loan. And we said, well, why don't we leave offset in? We had the discussion with the tax office. They were happy. And myself, I've got my own super fund, and my cash sits in my offset account, reduces the interest, and it's ready for my next property.
Good.
St George have always been innovators all the way.
Well, we were very lucky. We're a very, very innovative team.
Yeah.
It was a wonderful time to work there.
And what's generally the cost of running a self-managed super fund?
You've got your upfronts where you've got to get a solicitor account to actually get involved and set up the trust fund. You've got to have a couple of companies for your custodian, for your trustee. So you've got costs there. I would, as I said, I'm no accountant, but I would say if you put around about $5,000 aside, you should cover most of the stuff. And you've got a regular accountant's got to do your financial returns, and an auditor's got to check it.
It's just a little bit expensive at the. I mean, I know some friends of mine recently looked at buying a property, a hobby farm, Ken and Dee out at Cowra, but, those sorts of things you've got to be very careful of too.
That's right.
In that sense, and the cost of them going out and doing all of that, probably prohibitive to some degree.
You've got to have the dollars to start.
Yeah.
Like, I've had people ring up and say, I've got 60,000, can I do it? And I say, well, I wouldn't.
Yeah.
I can't. Obviously, I'm not a financial advisor, but my own experience is I want a couple of $100,000 to start it.
To get
That's
it
my
going.
feeling.
Yeah.
And Charles, from the real estate agents and the vendors' perspective, does it matter who's buying the property?
Not at all, no. But again, it really comes back to you can't buy off a related entity. You can't do business off a related entity to some degree. Again, I think there are a lot of people out there right now, Chris, that if the taxation department did an audit, there'd be a lot of damage out there. You'd have to agree with that, Neil?
Well, that's the thing. Like the ones, obviously, the people I see that I can actually say, well, yes, you can do this, you can't do this. So I'm advising them what the rules. I obviously can't give financial advice, but I'm giving them the rules. So they say, okay, well, say if you're a doctor, you can buy your own surgery and work out of there for a commercial, which is great.
Commercial, yeah.
Yeah, but
So what are the things that you can buy within your super, say, from a property perspective?
well, from a property perspective, you're talking residential or commercial property. If you want to borrow the money. If the bank needs to take a mortgage over something, so you can't buy a boat or something, you've got to buy something you can actually take a mortgage
That's a
over.
shame.
Tell him that. I was going to or wine. You can't.
I've got 3,000 in super, so I wouldn't be buying a big boat, I'll tell you that.
Yes, but that's the thing. Like, really, if the bank wants to lend you money, they've got to take security over something. And obviously, as we all know, banks like to take security over property. So commercial or residential property, but it's got to be the right type of property. Some banks won't go, like, say, a mining town. They won't lend you in a mining town.
Well, they're restricting too in terms of the LVRs 50% on community title as an example.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
But you set up a bare trust, and the whole process is really quite interesting. How you connect one trust to the other, and you move down those paths, because they won't lend you money directly in your super fund. In the true sense.
Oh, they'll lend it to you, but the super fund doesn't own the property.
Yes, so it's a very interesting process.
Yeah, I learned a lot about it when I was actually getting it all set up, and that's why after I set it up, then I got my own super fund, because I understood it then. So.
And Charles mentioned before about related party. Now, there's a difference between residential and commercial on that as well, isn't there?
Exactly, yeah. Residential, it must be called an arm's length transaction. So it's got to be someone outside of your family, It doesn't have to be through a real estate. Obviously, I think it should be, but it doesn't have to be. As long as it's not someone related to you in some way, and some person is buying a property, great, you go and buy the property. Commercial is different. As I said, a doctor or a dentist can actually buy their own surgery and rent it back to themselves. So it's quite good that way.
No, wonderful. Well, we're going to jump to Charles in a second, and we'll be talking more about self-managed super funds after the break. But look, to get a great overview of the self-managed super fund process and to help you understand what you can and can't do, Jeff has actually written an e-book very recently, and you can download it absolutely for free. It just gives you hints and ideas about borrowing within your super fund. Now, to get a copy, all you need to do is send a SMS of your first name and your email to 0459 777 777. You'll get a copy of the book straight away coming into your email address. Well, Charles, let's jump to your figures.
Yeah,
what's going on?
Yeah, pretty good again this week. The national clearance rate was 77.1%. This time last year it was 70.9%. So we're actually tracking better again for the last 2 or 3, 4 weeks and more. We've been tracking better in those rates, and Sydney was the best one. It came in at 81.1, followed by Melbourne at 79.9. The one that we've been talking a lot about is Canberra, 78.4% clearance rate. So I guess Canberra's is still a very strong market like Sydney and Melbourne, and for very good reason.
Wonderful. So we're getting a common trend every week.
Yeah.
What's about the homes advertised for sale?
Not good, not good. Now this dropped back again, but it's only slightly. Again, remember 3 weeks ago we had a massive 12.31% increase. Last week, negative 0.51. This week it's negative just slightly, but 1.11. I'd like to see it move, but I guess I'm going to take it over a period of weeks and even that out. I think we're in for a reasonable rise of stock coming up soon. I can see sort of that supply issue being fixed a little bit.
Wonderful. That's always good news for a lot of people out there.
Yeah.
And what about rent price movements?
They're not much there. They've been pretty stable. Again, I'm watching Hobart very closely, and same as Darwin. Those areas are getting more investors, particularly in Hobart. So there's many more investors, meaning that there's going to be a lot more competition in terms of the getting a tenant for a property. So that's what I'm watching very closely.
Wonderful. And then just finally the vacancy rates as well.
Oh, Sydney's just boomed ahead of everything. 0.81% clearance rate, followed by Melbourne at 1.59. Perth was the one that we've always been watching, and I'm really pleased to say that Perth has come back under 10s. It's been sitting in 10s for a while, 9.07%, so that's fantastic, and 3.82% on average on those three capital cities, and that in itself is even a better vacancy rate than we've had in a long time.
Now, we've talked for years on the show that quite often it's not the economics of property investing that affects the property market, it's more the consumer confidence. We're getting hammered in the papers at the moment with APRA kind of freaking everyone out. Some of the banks saying they're not lending, some of them saying they're putting the rates up. Surely that's going to have an effect on the market, because I mean, that's exactly why they're doing it. Yeah,
and I think Tom might touch on it later on if he gets a chance about what he's been seeing in the auction arena. We spoke about it earlier, and he's not seeing many investors out there coming to the auctions as they used to do. So I think it's starting to impact. I really hope it does, Chris, because the problem is, though, is that if you raise these interest rates and they're impacting across the country, not just in Sydney and Melbourne, where it's difficult. You've got Perth, where they don't need an interest rate rise. So how are they going to balance that? This is going to be the biggest issue I find. I think you might find more investors in some of those down or difficult areas. They're going to get belted to the point where they may have to sell property, and that's not good for any of those economies.
Now, Jeff, as a broker, you must be seeing it straight away that as soon as the banks change policy, you've got a whole bunch of investors that can't do anything.
Yeah, well, say a year ago I could lend a certain amount of money to a person. That person comes to me now, and that amount is reduced. So it's just, you know, as I said, APRA's doing their job. They want to slow it down, and they are. They are making the things more difficult to actually do. And that's what they want to do. So yeah, it's coming.
And you can understand it for the Sydney, Melbourne people, but you can't understand it if you're in a lot of the other places around Australia.
Yeah, it's the old you know, chasing a butterfly with a bulldozer sort of thing, isn't it? So it's the same idea. Is the big blunt instrument of interest rate changes, which I've never been a massive fan of.
Often it's too late. There's so much knee-jerk reaction out there, and that's really the most difficult thing I see.
Wonderful. Well, we're going to take a short break. We'll be back soon. Join us in a minute.
Say hello to Kia Sportage GT line, packed with features like panoramic sunroof.
It takes a lot to create new life. Elevit has more folic acid and iron than any other pregnancy multivitamin. Folic acid is clinically proven to reduce the risk of neural tube defects. But it takes time to build up your nutrient levels. So you should start taking Elevit before you start trying. Take the first step for a healthy baby with Elevit, Australia's #1 pregnancy multivitamin, with you every step.
We're here for the life-changing goals, the lifelong goals, and the long life goals. So wherever you're at and whatever your goal, AMP is here to help you explore, plan, track, and most importantly, realise your goals, so you can own a better tomorrow.
Did you know the right agent could make you hundreds of thousands of dollars more on the sale of your home? Secure the right agent to get you top dollar at openagent.com.au. And the best part is it's absolutely free. Simply type in your postcode, to discover agents who have sold homes in your area.
We got $200,000 more by choosing the right agent.
Call or visit openagent.com.au.
Well, you know you make me wanna kick my heels up and throw my hands up and throw my hair back and come on now, don't forget to say you will. You know you make me wanna say that you love me, say that you need me, say that you want me.
The $10 Australian grown cotton tee. Naturally soft for tough love.
Jump up and shout now.
Which small car comes with a bold new look? New Kia Rio.
Cyclone Debbie will impact the tropical Queensland coast within hours. It is a dangerous system with torrential rain, destructive winds and a significant storm surge.
An evacuation warning has been
The
issued.
team here at Sky News Weather will bring you continued live coverage as the system strikes and as major flooding spreads south through Queensland. For updates, alerts and news as it breaks, always know what's heading your way. Sky News Weather, Channel 603.
Welcome back to Your Property Empire. Well, joining me on the show tonight is Jeff Brown, mortgage broker and self-managed super fund specialist from Hunterwood Solutions, and we're just being joined by Tom Panos, head of real estate advertising at News Corp. So, Jeff, let's get back on the self-managed super fund chat. Who actually owns the asset with this? Because there's also some security as well that the bank can't necessarily repossess it.
Well, that's right, that's right. So I won't take half an hour on this because it can get quite involved, but the super fund is a bare trust or a custodian, and it's called a bare trust for a particular reason where the whole point of the bare trust is just to hold the property on behalf of the super fund. So it's quite complicated, and as I said, I won't go into hours on this, but the bare trust buys it on behalf of the super fund. The bare trust gives the mortgage to the bank on behalf of the super fund, but the super fund's the actual borrower for the loan. So it is quite complicated, and anyone wants to talk to me later about it, I'm happy to talk to them, but I don't want to spend hours.
And again, I think in your ebook you had all the diagrams and the rest of it, which is even too complicated for the TV.
It is, and that's the thing. I'm quite happy to go through it. It is quite confusing for someone who doesn't know, and I don't want to sort of spend the whole time now talking about custodian.
Tom, we were talking before the break that obviously there's a change in the market and people need to be more creative to find ways to borrow money. Are you seeing a difference in the, I guess, the ratio of first home buyers and investors these days?
Absolutely. I mean, I've noticed it in the last couple of weeks. There was a, there was a property that went off for $130,000 over reserve in Surrey Hills, and none of the bidders there were investors. I noticed in all my auctions on Saturday, I did 10 auctions on Saturday, and out of the 10, Chris, there was no investors. The people that bought it were...
And actually, how do you know the difference between an investor and a first home buyer?
Okay, in New South Wales, people got to register, so the agent's got a pretty good idea of what their purpose is, and they'll say to me, you know, they'll say to me before an auction, they'll say, Tom, push that it's a good investment, right? When I asked them, what am I going to push about this property, they said, don't harp too much about investment because they're all owner-occupiers.
Right, okay. And they got mummy and daddy or they got grandparents there?
Yeah, well, sometimes they're, I mean, it could be they've sold a property and they're rebuying, you know, upgrading or downgrading, which was one in Glebe. I was 7 out of 7 by 2 o'clock on Saturday afternoon, thinking I was going to sell everything, and the last 3 were apartments, newish type apartments, and they didn't sell, which says to me that it might be a bit of a few cold feet with those newer properties.
Should have given me a call, Tom. Now, Jeff, Obviously, most people understand how banks are going to lend money for individuals. They're going to look at your income from your wages and maybe some rental income if you've got that. What do they do with a self-managed super fund?
They still take part of your wages. So, as you know, if you're a PAYG person, your employer must pay you 9.5% contributions into your super. So they'll take that 9.5%. They'll also take the rental on the property you're going to buy, plus if you have other properties within your fund, they'll take that rental as well. So it is a little bit more difficult because, you know, if you're on 100,000, they're going to take 9,500 for the year. So obviously they're not going to have living expenses because it's the super funds buying, not you. So it's a little bit more difficult to borrow in your super fund, and you've got to put in about 30% deposit in most cases. So it's the rent from the property, the contributions, and in some cases, if you've been doing extra contributions for 2 years or more, they're happy to take those extra contributions as well.
Like when you're self-employed,
if it's self-employed, like myself, I put extra in every pay. I've been doing that for about 4 years now, so they can look at mine and say, okay, just been paying this extra in, we'll take that as extra income towards the super.
Sure. Now, Tom, you're training, one of your many jobs that you've got, you're training real estate agents as well. In this kind of market, are the better agents starting to educate their clients? Because obviously if they're having serviceability problems and a good agent says, oh, well, have you considered using your super or something like that, they might be able to get that extra buyer to the auction.
Absolutely. Chris, you've summed that up. What they've got to do is become deal makers in this marketplace. They can't rely on the market putting the sale together all the time. So what the good ones are doing is they're sitting there and they're not just sort of selling property, they're actually giving a solution to a client that is having a challenge because they're doing what they've got to do to put a deal across the line and helping them with their finances and their resourcing of the financial resources required to fund a property and tax structures and entities that they can. I mean, they don't sit there as an accountant or as an expert here, but they'll sit there and put people in contact with other people.
Now, I guess it's the same as all your education is you're starting off with agent 1.0, 2.0, what are you up to, 3 or 4 by now? It's a changing environment, so they've got to constantly change.
Correct, by May I'll be 4.0, so just you hang tight with me to 2020, I've got something special happening there.
But that's the thing is, the investors and the first home buyers and the agents, they all need to constantly be on the move to learn more things.
100%. And if you don't learn them, the consumer's going to learn them ahead of you because all they do is they Google things now. So you want to be, you actually want to be the Google of the marketplace. That's what you want to be.
Now, Jeff, as a final thing, what is the worst case? It's not all rosy things. You've already said if you stuff it up, you might be paying 100% tax rather than 15%.
Yeah.
What else can happen, say, if you don't repay it or something like that?
Well, obviously, there's a protection in there called limited recourse borrowing arrangements where if by some chance you do the wrong thing, you haven't made your payments on time, and the bank says, well, sorry, we've done all the work with you, we've tried to get you to pay, you haven't paid, they can repossess the property, but the good thing about it is your actual super assets are protected. So they can only take the property that you've mortgaged. So if you've got 2 other properties in your super fund, they can't, like an all money's mortgage previously, they can't go and take that off you. They can only
if you get the right advice, you do it properly, get the paperwork sorted, you're not going to lose the lot.
Exactly.
That's the main
So the
thing.
government was very, when this was put together and when we're allowed to actually lend money to customers in the super fund, the rules were incredibly strict. They've been even tightened in the last 2 years. But that was the main number one thing, was protection of the consumer. So if they did make an error and something happened where they couldn't make their payments, then they weren't they didn't take their super cash that was already there.
Which is obviously good news.
Yes.
So certainly if you're finding it slightly tougher with the banks at the moment with the serviceability calculators, then maybe super is something that you should consider. Now, to get a copy of Jeff's book, as we mentioned before, it's called The Insider's Secrets to Self-Managed Super Funds. All you need to do is SMS your first name, space, and then your email address to 0459 777 777. You'll get a text straight away and then an email in your inbox. Tom, let's take us through one of the properties set in the papers at the weekend.
Yeah, so 652 London Road in Chandler. This property here, Chris, it is known for people pulling up in their cars and staring at this property.
Well, you can look at the photo there. It pretty much says it all. Wow.
Yeah, night and day. People just pull up. It's definitely one of Brisbane's greatest designs, this home. And as I said, people just rock up and have a look at it. It's actually been built based on homes in Atlanta, Boston and Georgia in the USA. That's where the architect design has come from it. And the agent I spoke to, Tyson Clark from Sotheby's International Realty in Queensland, told me that at Christmas times the vendors construct a 14-foot Christmas tree and they put it in the formal lounge and they get scaffolding to actually get it up there. So it is a very unique property, 5.3 million to 5.8 million. So go and have a look at that. You know, it was in the Courier Mail and Brisbane News. So I think
something more like a Sydney price tag. What you're going to get in Queensland is going to be kind of tenfold almost.
Well, Chris, in the part of the world that you live in, Australia, that house there has got 10+ million over it any day of the week.
We'll be getting an apartment for that kind of money, Tom.
Yeah.
Down in Sydney.
Yeah.
So you got yourself a bit of land. Now, we've got a few holidays coming up. There's kind of Easter, school holidays, Anzac Day. What kind of a difference does that make to the property market?
Well, I think what it does is it certainly affects the mind of vendors, because vendors want to get the best price. So one of the things they don't want to do is be clashing with key days. A lot of vendors actually think that school holidays is going to impact the value of their property. There's nothing to suggest that that's the case. Would I auction on Easter Saturday? Probably not. Anzac Day, well, this year I don't think it falls on a Saturday, so I wouldn't let that be too much of a concern. So I would say to any of the people watching the show now that in that process of thinking of selling, I would not let too much of the holidays affect your plan. You actually want to sell when there's not a lot of properties on the market, which is probably not a bad idea because maybe others are going to go away.
See, there's always a contrarian view, isn't there? So there's no set rule that's going to make or break, because sometimes do the opposite and you're going to come true.
Correct. But I mean, probably Easter Saturday would be the only day that I'd say maybe hold your auction instead of it being, I think, the 8th of April. Do it on the 15th. Sorry, Easter's on the 15th. Maybe do your auction on the 22nd or do it on the 8th.
Some good advice as always.
Yeah.
Tom Panos, Jeff Brown, thanks for joining us on the show. Thanks for joining us as well. Until next time, I'm Chris Gray. Thanks for watching.
The information featured in this program is general in nature and therefore should not be relied upon. Guests appearing on the program may have commercial arrangements with some of the companies mentioned. Before making any investment, insurance or financial planning decisions, you should consult a licensed professional who can advise whether your decision is appropriate for you.